The Rising Order is about a young woman who works for a mega tech company. So it's very much inspired by my own personal background. It takes place in Chicago. I lived in Chicago. When I wrote the book, I lived there for almost 10 years. And honestly, I was expecting to live there longer, but we moved back home during the pandemic to get help from my parents, and then my husband's parents live we're in the Indianapolis area now. So it takes place in Chicago. A young woman works for a big megatech computing company. She's a recruiter, and she's taken hostage at a concert by a domestic terrorist organization. And they use her to infiltrate her computing company and attack Chicago's electrical grid.
Okay.
So that's the elevator pitch.
I like it.
Yeah, but I know we kind of talked about this before we started recording, but it's a lot about extremism and indoctrination as well, which was something that I also explored as I started asking myself, who are these types of people who were committing these acts of violence, and what happens if you kind of pair that extremism with cyber warfare, because that to me is the biggest threat.
Hmm.
Not even necessarily foreign agents, but like domestic agents here who, don't have any sort of rule book when it comes to how you engage in war.
Right. Well, yeah, even some of the conversations I said I had with my friend is that, well, if we know that in Russia, for example, that we have these factories of essentially internet trolls or hackers or
Yes.
all of
Mm-hmm.
the above, why can we not go in and shut these places down? And
Mm-hmm.
he says, well, it's just not that easy. Like, you can't just go over there and, like, it'd be very obvious who did this. And
Mm-hmm.
a bit of an equilibrium right now that no one is causing these mass attacks because it's kind of be like, it's almost like the nuclear deterrent idea. Whereas if one person fires a nuke, well, then
Yes,
all of a sudden
exactly.
everyone's firing and we're all obliterated. But like the
Exactly.
electrical grid is a really really good one, because there are some of these hacks that are already happening in real time, where like schools in the US are being held ransom, or hospitals, for some of their systems that are offline because a hacker has gone in and disabled one of their essential you know yeah.
Exactly.
So
Yes. And it's interesting you say that, because that nuclear deterrent idea was one I learned about in college, actually. One of my political science classes, I minored in political science. And that idea always stayed with me because my professor at the time presented the idea, well, what happens, and I just said this, but like, what happens if there's a group of people who's not, they don't care about that nuclear deterrent, because they don't care about what happens if, okay, like I nuke your country, but then I don't nuke your country because you'll nuke mine. But there's groups of people that don't operate in that capacity because they don't care.
right.
And so that's really what prompted this organization that I created, to be, homegrown, a homegrown terrorist organization.
Right. And so who did you use as the villains? Like who comprised this homegrown organization?
So this homegrown organization is called Reds, and it stands for something, but you'll have to read to find out more about that. But in this homegrown organization, all of the members operate under aliases, and the aliases are created after very dangerous and lethal predators and animals, and that's because their mantra is their mantra is to absolve their past identities and forget and sever all ties that they had to their past. And so they create these aliases to operate under moving forward. So we never find out any of their names. But the two main villains, I would say, would be Wolf, who's one of our main characters, and then his boss, essentially, who's Spider. And the book alternates point of view. So we go back and forth between Flynn, who is the woman who I mentioned, and then Wolf. And so we kind of see how their encounter and their involvement together continues to transform throughout the book.